Now that we've gone ahead and built our first cues, let's build some effects, make our show a lot more interesting. In Onyx, there are two primary ways that we're going to build effects. There's the effects engine, and then there's also the Dylos pixel mapper, which, as we'll see in the next video, is more than just pixel mapping. It's more than just running video across lights. It's actually an effects engine as well, which can do pan, tilt, color, any type of effect. We'll get there in a second. First, let's look at building some effects with the effects generator. We'll go ahead and select our darts, find my group here, and go ahead to the effects program window. The effects program window offers us a number of tools that help us to build effects. We're not going to use it in the first example, but I'll use it in subsequent examples. If I go to any parameter, effects is going to work just like the fanning did before. So I go find my parameter, such as pan tilt, and then I'm going to go over to the right side to effects. So as we noted with the fanning tool, the regular parameters on the left in the groups intensity, pan tilt, color, gobo, beam, beam effects, and framing are the things, the attributes that our lights actually have, and then we press on one of those or we modify it and then move to the right side to things like fanning and effects. So now that I'm on pan and tilt, I'll go over to effects, and I see on my encoder wheels swing for pan, swing for tilt, speed, and figure. I'm going to pop this up so it's a little more visual, and I'm just going to go ahead and start to turn the swing for the tilt up as well as the pan. Now, the swing is just how far off of the base, wherever the fixtures are currently sitting, that the effect is going to modulate. And so I haven't dialed in a speed yet, which is why we don't see anything happening. I'm also going to pop out this side arrow and go to the effects view. When we get things moving, we'll see some things here, and it just helps you to see what I'm doing. Normally when I'm programming, I'm not going to have all this up, but it does make it more visual for you. We'll start to bring in some speed. And now we see our lights moving. Now, the figure column, our last one here, determines for pan and tilt type effects, the relationship of the pan and tilt. You can see it here in this window, and the dots represent the fixtures and the moving dot, the movement. So the straight line is not often the most exciting, especially when combining pan and tilt. So let's scroll down a little. For this one, I'm choosing to use the circle. Notice as we use the figure, the lights automatically change right away as we change it. Now, this can be very powerful. Just going to slow this down for a second. This is going to be very powerful when we're storing things. Because if we go to our programmer, we can see that swing, speed, and the figure, everything that we've worked with so far is a regular parameter. So when we record this to a fader, to a cue list that's on a fader, and we're modifying, say with an override or a regular cue list, and we're moving things up and down, we're going from cue to cue, effects aren't treated in any special way inside Onyx. It's not like we have to turn on certain fader settings to pay attention to effects or to crossfade effects or anything like that. There's no special settings. Nothing is different from the normal way of working. And this is something that is really special in Onyx, that to make an effects speed fader or a button that only affects the figure of the effect, I just select that attribute, record it, and I'm done. Okay? That's all that it takes. It's very simple. So I'm going to bring my speed back up again, and we notice here that, okay, this effect is starting to look good. We've got a nice little movement here, a nice little ballyhoo, but all of the lights are doing it at exactly the same time. We need to fan or offset these lights across the effect, so we'll do that here in effects timing. we have two options when it comes to effects timing, and with an effect like this, it's pretty easy to illustrate. First, we have wave. This is the one that I utilize most often. I'm going to set the amount to 12 as the shortcut at the top shows me here. And what that's now done is spread that effect out across all 12 units nice and evenly, so that the effect is basically happening just offset at perfect times, and when it gets to the last fixture, it then wraps to the first fixture. It's very even, very balanced looking, okay? If I, for example, choose 6, then I've got my 2 rows of 6, and so one row is running the effect, the other is running the effect, and they're in sync with each other, more or less. They're not mirrored, but they are in sync with each other at this moment. Okay, step is a little bit different. So if I turn off my wave and I dial in a step, we'll start with 12. What we get for step is a chasing type effect, as I would call it, where, as we can see, each light performs the effect. It does a whole round of the effect, a whole cycle, and then it moves to the next light. So one light at a time if we have 12 lights and we set the step to 12. Now, that's not very exciting, but what is smaller derivatives of the total fixture count. So if we dial in, say, a step of 4, now 4 lights are running the effect at a time, the rest are still. 2, okay, now every other light is actually running the effect, then the other half do. And so it's a lot more fluid. As I mentioned before, most often I personally use wave for things, but when you do want a chasing type effect, step can often be the answer. Either way, they're both working with the timing, they're both offsetting the fixtures across the rig. With a pan tilt type effect, I'll often go in here and wave, and say here I've got 12 lights, okay? Then what I'm gonna do is maybe choose a wave number that is not divisible by 12. So maybe I go to 4 or 5 and I lock that in, okay? Perfect. That looks great. Now, let's go ahead and record this on a fader. I've got space on my side here on my sub playbacks, and so I'm going to record some effects here. So let's go ahead and just record this. Press our cue list here, our playback rather, sub playback. And then I'm just going to give it a name. Call it pan tilt effects, and I'm going to make it an override fader, and I'll show you why. So once I clear this out, I can then have override control of this effect. And so what that looks like is that when I have this fader up all the way, I get this effect at the full speed that I recorded it at. Now, for this particular effect, that's not very fast. That's mostly so we don't blind myself in the studio. But as I bring the effect down, a few things happen. The sizing of the effect gets smaller, okay? The swing gets smaller, as does the speed, okay? And if I had recorded a base point in this effect, if I had taken the pan tilt, the regular parameter, and positioned it somewhere before going to effects, that would also be scaled back towards the default position, which is straight up or straight down, depending on how you're looking at the light, okay? And so all of those things in an override are going to be scaled as we move that fader up and down. And so we can see as we move it around, we're able to, gently or not, depending on the show and what's going on or the service, we're able to scale the effect that it's happening. We're able to come in and maybe it moves a little quicker. Then as something changes on stage, maybe we dial it back a little. Then we slow it down all the way. And then we bring it to a nice landing. We didn't see the effect suddenly stop. It's very subtle. Allows you to give the lighting a lot of character on its own. Let's build another effect. Go ahead and select those lights again. This time, I'm going to go ahead and build an intensity effect. So I'm going to turn off my submaster here so that I have intensity control for the lights, or else the submaster being an HTP fader is going to contribute to the output. Go over to effects, and this time we see something similar, but it's a little bit different. We have swing, speed, mode, and multiplier across our encoder wheels. And so what we're able to do here is dial that in, and we're only working with one parameter. Pan and tilt, as we saw in the last example, normally works together, but there is an effects parameter in the timing where you can go ahead and separate pan and tilt if desired. So for a intensity effect, I'm going to bring the swing up and out to 100%, and I'm actually going to go ahead and take the intensity of these lights and bring them to 50%. So I'm using here the side encoder on the NX4. I could also use the intensity wheel, or I could go to intensity on our regular parameters and dial it up on the normal wheel. There's a lot of great options there. Back over to effects, we'll bring in that speed. And so here's where we see an interesting notation about the effects. If we look at the mode column, we see the sine wave, and it has a black line through the middle, which indicates the base point of the effect. So when I have my intensity at 50% on these lights, they're right in the middle of their range, and I do an 100% swing, as we can see, the effect swings from 100% to 0 all the way. If I bring the intensity all the way up to 100, now I have an effect that starts at 100%, that's the base or the middle in this particular effects mode. It comes down to 50%, and then it goes up effectively to 150%. So there's a pause when it hits 100%. And so in this case, my swing is not using the full fixture, what the capabilities of the fixture are, because ultimately we're bottoming out at the top or the bottom if we were at 0%. You can use that to your advantage, just be aware of it so that if you're using a certain size swing and you're near one of the ends of that attribute, then the effect may bottom out or top out. Using the different modes can really help with this though. So I'm going to dial in here on my mode, the additive ramp here. So this is the effects 3 mode, and it's purely additive. So now we're not getting that pause in the middle. Still, from 100% to get up to full, because this effect only uses half of the available range, we just have to take the swing, pull that up to 200%, and now we've got an effect from 0 to full. It's pretty much the same effect we had a minute ago when our base was at 50%. I'll just undo here till I get there. And our swing, our mode was the regular sine wave. Our base was at 50%. We'll bring ourselves back there. And then our mode was that sine wave. It looks about the same. There's just multiple ways to get there. Now we'll go ahead. We've got our multiplier. That's our last column. That's a speed multiplier. So especially with intensity and colors on LED effects, sometimes you may want to use a multiplier to speed it up. That's not a problem at all. And then we have, of course, our effects timing, our wave or our step. In this case, let's do just a wave of 4 here. Dial that in real good till we see something we like. Yeah, 3 is really nice. We get a nice symmetrical look with this rig. And we'll record that. Now, override's already selected, as we noted before. It's the last type that we recorded. And so we can name it here. Boom, press enter. That's recorded. Let's build a color effect. Select my darts. I'm going to bring up some intensity here on my fader. Go to Effects Program. And now we see this area in the Effects Program window called Effects Macro. And what Effects Macro is are some pre-built effects that you can quickly and easily apply. Now, the pre-built effects are an effect that's for one fixture. So it doesn't contain any wave or step information, any effects timing. Now, the purpose of this is that you are able to apply the effect to one fixture, to 10, to 1,000 fixtures. It's going to apply the same. And there's never going to be any weirdness because the effect was only designed for 10 fixtures. Now, if you do have an effect like the one we had just generated on intensity that you wanted to save as a preset for later, you can save it as a regular intensity preset with the effects information, and you'll just choose that from the record pop-up when it comes up, okay? But the effects macros are a little bit different because their purpose is to apply to any number of fixtures. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to choose the pink-white, and as you see, it applies. It has no timing, but I have my effects timing up on my wheels here. I'm going to do 3 on this one as well. Perfect. Record, fader, boom, done. Awesome. And so, as you can probably see already, we've built a few different effects on override type faders. We can bring in 1, 2, bring down my intensity fader, or all 3 of these. And with overrides and having that variable control of all the parameters that you stored there, you can see how just 3 simple faders right here can really quickly and easily become a lot more than 3 different looks, right? Because I've got my pan tilt look, which I can use with my submaster. I can add in the intensity. I can add in the color. I can pull out the intensity and run it off the fader. I can do any of these at varying percentages. And what you can see is all of a sudden, live and on the fly, you have a variety of different effects. You know, technically 3 by 3, maybe you would say that's 9 different effects, but you've got different percentages. So you have a lot of different options that look different to the eye, right? That you can build really quickly. Let's build a cue blender. So as I talked about when we talked about playbacks, a cue blender is not necessarily a type of effect that we can put effects on it, but it is very useful when you're programming. Here's an example that I like to use. We'll go ahead and grab our darts. I'm going to go to my 2D plan first. Zoom in a little, so I'm just on my darts here. And grab 2 at a time on each side, so it's 4 at a time. Grab our first set at full, record, gonna place it right here. It's gonna be an override type fader. I'm just gonna name it Cue Blender. So we're gonna go and record our second cue now. I'm gonna grab my NX4. Now, the interesting thing about the Cue Blender when we go to record here is that a Cue Blender, like a chase, is not a tracking type cue list in Onyx. From Q1 to Q2, there is not tracking, okay? And so when we've previously recorded in Onyx, our fixture values are now inactive in our programmer for those first 4 fixtures, okay? If I press record right now and record on top of this override, then what I'm going to see is that in the second cue, when I bring that up, I'm only going to get the second set of 4 fixtures. I'm not going to get a build like I'm looking for. So in this case, I'm just going to make my source active and inactive, hit my star so it's saved. We did this earlier. And now I can go ahead, save it, third set. I can even hit record enter here because my last cue list that I stored to is still selected. All the settings are there and we're good to go. If I clear this out and bring up my override, I now see just the first cue in an override type fashion. It's giving me control of all the parameters in the light, which is just intensity in this case. So let's go ahead and go here to our workspaces. I'm going to go to DJ and pull up my sub playback view right here. Go into my cue list settings. And then I'm going to click on Cue Blender here in my cue list settings. That turns it into a cue blender. Now we'll go back to our main view in our Workspaces tab. And so now when I bring this down and back up, I see something different. I see that as I move this fader, I get a really nice build up and down. Okay, so it builds, and then it comes back. And so we can stack this with effects. We can stack it with all kinds of things, right? We could sit here and run this up and down to the music, use it, to bring up just a couple lights, add in a few more, add in a few more. The possibilities are endless. But a cue blender can contain so much more than just pan tilt or just one type of information. There are really a lot of creative possibilities with it. And while I'm not going to go in depth right here, we have a number of videos on the Elation website in the Elation Learning Center that between the videos and the webinars go through this and give even more examples than we have here. Awesome. When it comes to effects, now it's time to move to Dylos, the pixel mapper that's integrated into Onyx, and explore pixel mapped and non-pixel mapped, but sort of pixel mapped effects. We'll see you there.